Welcome. Um, Here are the safety evacuation routes. That door and that door. If there's like a fire or something, and please turn off or silence your phones. We are recording this in the back. We have drinks and snacks over there. Feel free to help yourselves. A lot of cookies and muffins, and some water and coffee. Restrooms over there. When you exit the restroom, please do not close the door. They lock. Our Adopt a Road program is still going strong. Thank you to everyone who participates in this. I want to mention Keep Polk County Beautiful is a nonprofit that runs the Adopt a Road program for the county roads, and they're having their annual rewards and silent auction. And we are up for an award. We would love to have you there, whether you volunteer all the time, or once in a while, or just want to come cheer. It'd be great to have a big turnout. It's been 2 weeks from today in Ultras. If you want to go, and you know for sure, we want to cover as many of the $15 tickets as we can. And now here's my mom, Sarah.
Thank you, Austin. Here, take your cookie.
Dang, I want to do the thingy.
No.
This.
No, you can help me. Stand over here. Stand over here. You can help. Thank you, Austin. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself in just a minute. I know we have some new faces here, and I'm really not always all that great about remembering to introduce myself before we do these things, so I'll try to get better at that. But it's in the presentation that we're going to do today. Before we get to that, though, last month we talked about, we gave our award for our 2019 Volunteer of the Year, and you guys got to see the video. Kenneth is with us today, so thank you again, Kenneth, for all of your work there on the roadway project. We appreciate that. There's another award that we want to do, though, and this is, I'm a little disappointed in myself because I've had this since the beginning of the year, and I forgot to bring it to last meeting, to do it at the last meeting. But I did mention to you that Tammy's birthday is today, right? Happy birthday, Tammy! Yay! You have the look of fear on your face. I don't know why. What you're worried about?
It's actually only the anniversary.
Yes, of her birth date. Yes. So if you don't know Tammy has been very engaged and involved, volunteering with the atheist community of Polk County. She's been out to almost all of the roadway cleanups too. She's going to start leading some of those so that we don't have to try to be at all things. Again, the idea from the beginning was to sort of find some captains and build committees and have some other people come and take some ownership of things. So Tammy's going to start doing that for us. But you know, she's the one that shows up every week in the rubber boots to tromp around in the muddy ditches. So we're thankful for that. Now, Tammy experienced cardiac arrest in November and was shocked back to life by medical professionals using science-discovered techniques and skills that we are all very thankful for their efforts, that Tammy is with us. So I just want you to know, Tammy, how much we all love you and how much you mean to us, and that we're so happy that you're still with us. And I can only imagine how hard it must be to take the life that you that you're living now and make a change, that things have changed so dramatically for you. So I know that's got to be tough, but I hope that with the folks in the room here who love and support you, that you're going to have a great going forward. Now, since I deal with everything in stressful and awkward ways like this, using humor, we did want to get you a little something. So, Austin, go ahead. Here we got you a little award, and we thought it'd go really great with your horse trophies and your. Truly gone to the death and raised back to life, Tammy. Thank you, science. Yes.
I think the real reason for the award is because there was no life
There was no. Okay, so we're going to talk about Project Blitz today. And Project Blitz is a legislative effort that's put on by the Congressional Prayer Caucus Foundation. I don't know, how many of you are familiar with Project Blitz? How many of you have heard of it? Heard of it? Okay. Did anybody see the presentation I gave on this in Orlando last year? Some of this is similar, but if you haven't seen it, great. If you have seen it before, I've updated it all for 2020 because this stuff changes. As they learn new things, they tweak it. So we're going to do this deep dive. And before we go into the lion's den a little bit, I thought I'd tell you about myself and sort of the journey that brought me here to atheist and queer activism, and my own interest in Project Blitz and what they're trying to do. I'll try to give you the Reader's Digest version, but just a little quick look for context of sort of who I am and where I came from. So again, my name is Sarah Ray. I'm a godless heathen atheist, and I'm a trans woman. I was born in 1979 in a log cabin in the middle of nowhere, Illinois. Okay, well, not in that log cabin, but the day before my mother went into labor, she was sitting out nailing down deck boards on the wraparound porch outside our house. We lived in the garage while the house was being finished. And this is about 5 miles outside of town, a small town, Bethany, Illinois, which is about there, right? Kind of halfway between Chicago and St. Louis, nestled between acres and acres of farmland. And we had a horse and goats and chickens and rabbits and a big furry English sheepdog that we sheared down every spring. I had a pet turkey named Job of the biblical. And yes, there's a story that goes along with that I'll tell you some other time. If you want to hear it later, I'll be happy to tell you. When I was 7, we moved to town, Bethany, Illinois, population around 1,400. Small Midwest town. I had a high school graduating class of 32. There were no chain stores. The nearest town worth going to was about 35 minutes away. This is downtown, right? Very traditional, classic Midwest downtown. 2 whole blocks on Main Street with the classic brick buildings. We had a local diner and a local video rental place and a farm insurance agency and then, a locally owned bank, a locally operated bank. And it was a time and place where doors were rarely locked and you could ride your bike all over town. And nobody worried that we'd get hit by a car or picked up and driven away. And I like to say it was corn, soybeans, and white people as far as the eye could see. Bethany, Illinois, 0 stoplights, 8 churches. And for the longest time when I told that story, I'd said 9 churches, but one of them shut down, and then it was like a bed and breakfast for a little while, and then like an antique or knick-knack shop. And it's for sale again if you're interested in owning a church from 1916. 5-bed, 4-bath, single-family home with attached sanctuary, all yours for the reasonable asking price of $40,000. But yeah, we had a Baptist church and a Presbyterian church and 2 Methodist churches. Everybody went to church. I went to the First Christian Church of Bethany, Illinois, where in Sunday school mostly we tore out those little perforated pictures of Bible characters that you lick the back and stick it in your workbook. My elementary school music teacher was also the kids' music teacher at our church. My granny tended the nursery, and I think my dad was a deacon for a time. Looking back, we didn't take any of this too seriously. We went to church on Sundays and we prayed during the important meals. But at home, we didn't have a lot of conversations about Scripture and faith and the Bible and Jesus and all of that stuff. But I got into it for a time in high school, big time. And this is probably where my activist sort of tendencies started. And it foreshadows the topic that we're going to talk about today. I started a Bible study group at my school, and one year I organized a meet me at the flagpole. Yes, I was one of those. There I am. Look how excited I was to get Bibleopoly, the Jesus ripoff of Monopoly. I actually asked for that as a gift. I wrote and gave a couple of sermons in my teens. I had a fancy youth study Bible that had all kinds of topics that we'd, talk about during our meetings at the school, the students in the class. But even then, in the mid-'90s, as a student, I knew that there were some legal concerns to be considered. So I researched and I studied, and I became an expert on what I thought was an expert on my rights as a Christian student. And I probably got that information from a resource like this. This is from the website of the organization behind Project Blitz, the Congressional Prayer Caucus Foundation, on a section titled Freedom of Religious Expression in Public Schools. I knew that while our small school didn't have a lot of extracurricular clubs, but if they provided a venue to the math club or the chess club, they had to provide a venue to my Bible club too. That's number 8 on their list. I knew that it had to be student-led and student-organized, and aside from having permission to use a classroom or other area, there couldn't be any faculty or teachers involved. We met during lunch in all ironic places. The biology lab. The biology lab where we learned biology from our very Christian biology teacher. And then it was around that time that I started feeling different in other ways. Puberty was acting on me in ways that just didn't make sense to me, and not so much in the way that most people feel confused by changes in their own body. I didn't feel right in my own body, and I became obsessed with ideas and thoughts of what it might be like to be a girl. Why wasn't I a girl? How great it would be to just wake up tomorrow and be right in who I'm supposed to be in my body, a girl. We didn't have words like transgender back then. We were jokes on the Jerry Springer show. I didn't know my wife was a man, right? And gay was a 4-letter word still in my town. So I learned that being different, especially being different in this way, is not good. And so I experimented with all of that in private. I kept it hidden, and I didn't let it out of the box until long years later when I moved down here. While I was supposed to be going to college, which is another fun story for another time, I got wrapped up into a local radio station in Decatur, Illinois, where I took a part-time job and eventually moved up to the producer of the #1 show in the market. It was the Byers and Company Morning Show on News Talk 1340 WSOY AM Decatur. And after that 3-hour show, it was my job to book guests and line things up for the next day and for the rest of the week. But we also had your classic conservative talk radio lineup. G. Gordon Liddy, Rush Limbaugh, Dr. Laura Schlesinger, Sean Hannity, Mike Gallagher. And of course, on Sunday mornings, we had Christian programming. I ended up back in church, this time for a girl. Well, it was always, every time was for a girl, I guess. And that was a church of God, unlike anything I had ever experienced before. The church I grew up in was a sit down, stay quiet until it's time to stand up and sing a song, and then you sit back down and stay quiet. And this place was a stand up and shout if the Spirit moves you kind of place. And it was a culture shock. But they had a praise band, and I played in the praise band. I played guitar. And then I started doing a one-on-one Bible study with the youth pastor at this church. And he had me going through chapter by chapter, and we were writing down the truths and the promises. And the more I read, the less I believed. As they say, the road to atheism is scattered with Bibles that had been read. And so I read it, and I stopped believing. And I eventually left that church and was the last church that I'd ever gone to. And then about 12 years ago, we came down here. I moved down here from Illinois, and I really started to sort of break through all of this stuff. We started a podcast that my wife and I do now almost weekly, where originally we were just talking about my transition and what it's like to be trans in a deep red area of Florida. And then some things happened. North Carolina passed a law about trans people using restrooms. And so we started talking about stories in the news that were related to LGBTQ folks. And the more we talked about those stories, the more we notice that, boy, every one of those stories is something about, here's another example of religion being assholes to the queer community. And so now our show is very political and atheist-y. And then it was then that I realized that whenever there's an attack on the queer community, that's who's behind it, against our basic rights to exist in a free society. It's almost always coming from someone wearing a MAGA hat, holding a Bible, or more often both. And so I found my activism standing at the intersection of this atheist and queer communities. So then that's sort of, all of that builds up to what led to us creating the atheist community of Polk County, which there is an introductory video from last May if you're interested in reading more or hearing more about how that formed and whatnot. But that kind of gives you maybe a background glimpse into what got us interested in doing this sort of work. And that brings us to Project Blitz. This is the backbone of the religious rights efforts to install Christian dominionism in the United States under the guise of religious liberty. And that sounds ominous, and it should, but a change of decor is in order. There we go. That's better. The Congressional Prayer Caucus Foundation was established in 2005 by Randy Forbes to work alongside members of the Congressional Prayer Caucus in order to build a network of like-minded government leaders who are committed to prayer and action. That quickly sort of spread out to the states and became more about legislating an agenda well beyond just networking and prayer. The dark blue color here shows states where there is a state legislative prayer caucus. And the yellow dots there, we have one, indicates that there is a state director as well. And according to their website, the Florida Legislative Prayer Caucus is an official Florida caucus whose members are state legislators committed to advancing policies and initiatives that promote religious freedom, America's Judeo-Christian heritage, and prayer. Nothing insidious there. And so the Project Blitz playbook was created for those legislators to use, in their own words, to protect the free exercise of traditional Judeo-Christian values and beliefs, reclaim and properly define the narrative, to see public discourse understood and defined on their terms, to reclaim and properly frame the narrative and language of religious liberty. So the emphasis here is mine. But again, notice this is about rewriting the narrative and definition of religious liberty through influencing state legislation. To put it into perspective, Protect Thy Neighbor, a project of Americans United for Separation of Church and State, documented 86 bills filed in state legislatures across the country in 2015. Most of them are right out of this playbook. The most common bills allow discrimination against LGBTQ Americans and deny access to reproductive health care, as well as some more nefarious ones, as we'll talk. Jump ahead from 2015 to 2018, that total number swells to 370. Thankfully, many of those didn't pass, but the ones that did pass are clearing the pathway for others. As you'll hear from them in their own words again later, they'll pass one in Tennessee and take what they've learned from that and move it to Missouri, and then use those techniques to try to pass it in Missouri, and it just kind of adapts and moves around. In the last 2 years, more than 130 Project Blitz bills were introduced in 35 states. 15 bills passed, and at last count, over 45 have already been filed in 2020.
Did y'all know that I am a commissioner? That governmental anointing, we prophesy. I never knew it was going to fall on me. I'm going to say that one more time. I am an elected official. That's crazy. A demon buster that write laws. Only God could do something like that. When I come in the pulpit, there's something that happens to me and I can just flow. But God had to anoint me to go in the gates of the city to go in the chambers of the city to write laws and to be able to debate and write legislation so that his kingdom could come and manifest itself like never before.
Does everybody know this woman? This is Apostle Kimberly Daniels. She's no longer a commissioner, but she runs a side hustle ministry where demonic possession and exorcisms and prosperity gospel and claims of personal revelation from God, and she speaks in tongues and all kinds of great stuff. She's the Democratic state representative for House District 14, Kim Daniels, who, in the wake of tragedy, used the Parkland school shooting to advance the bill that put In God We Trust on all of our schools. That bill came right out of the Project Blitz playbook. She filed House Bill 303. That passed in 2017 and bans school districts, quote, from discriminating against students, parents, and personnel on the basis of religious viewpoint or expression. But you can see here that it's being promoted as putting prayer back in school. That's also a Project Blitz bill. Last year, she sponsored a bill that would require all public high schools to offer an elective class studying the Bible. Put a pin in that. We'll be back to that in a moment. The Christian nationalist movement is very well funded, well organized. This is data taken from the public Form 990 filings that we all as nonprofits have to file every year. If you make more than $50,000, you have to report more than, like, our organization is below that threshold, so we just have to say we didn't make $50,000. But above that, you have to report a whole lot more data unless you're a church. But this is the Congressional Prayer Caucus Foundation that shows their annual revenue of about $2 million. And they're spending every penny. There's your income and expense. And of course, their mission is supported indirectly from other organizations who has much higher revenue, like Liberty Counsel and the Beckett Fund and Family Research Council, the ACLJ. Alliance Defending Freedom, there on the far right, their recent revenues exceed $50 million annually. And that doesn't say that money is everything, but I think that speaks to just how well organized and well funded these folks are. There's a high level of investment. So Project Blitz is a code name for this report, the Report and Analysis on Religious Freedom Measures Impacting Prayer and Faith in America. They needed an acronym. I'm a Disney person. I need an acronym for everything. And this was about 140 some odd pages. They refresh it every year. It comes with cherry-picked studies and just false science claims and model legislation that legislators can just tear out and file on the floor. And they even offer resources like lawyers trained in constitutional law to help draft legislation if they need it and to defend the bills if they get challenged. So a disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer. I'm just a concerned citizen. You don't need to be a legal expert to understand this, though. The language that it's written in is pretty plain, but don't take legal advice from a PowerPoint presentation. So this is divided into three main categories: legislation regarding our country's religious heritage, resolutions on religion's history and freedom, and religious liberty protection. The initial idea was that some things were probably going to be easier to pass. And so they would start with those to kind of test the waters to see what they might be able to then slip in next, and they'd move up to that next tier. One of those easy ones was the In God We Trust on our schools display law. And it worked here. But rather than go through these, the presentation I did last year sort of went through a very dry, in order through their playbook. I mixed this up a little bit. We're going to kind of group these into categories and look and see at more of who they're targeting and how. To be Christian is to be American. To be American is to be Christian. That's what they'd want you to believe. And a lot of these efforts are aimed at basically just rewriting history to make this the Christian nation from the start. That it's not. So the first category we want to look at is education. So we talked about this one already. The Kimberly Daniels passed here in Florida, requiring the display of In God We Trust in our schools. 7 states have passed this law, and there are a bunch of others that considered it last year and a bunch more that are already considering it this year. Some have laws on the books that encourage teachers or administrators to display the national motto. A lot of Florida schools decided, hey, it's the state motto too, and we fly the state flag, so that's good. We don't have to hang up any more signs. Because, of course, again, this is an unfunded mandate. Oh, you have to hang signs all over your schools, but we're not going to pay for it. You have to figure out how to pay for it in school districts that are already cash-strapped to start with. So these two kind of go hand in hand. They're promoting certain historical documents related to the nation's founding, like the Federalist Papers, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, even the Mayflower Compact, the Northwest Ordinance. The Civic Literacy Act would require high school students to study these documents as a graduation requirement and encourages teachers to read and post excerpts. That doesn't sound too awful bad, right? The Religion and Legal History Act provides for displays of these documents in state buildings. So it seems harmless, but they provide some examples for us. The Mayflower Compact says something like, having undertaken for the glory of God and advancement of the Christian faith in honor of our king and country, a voyage to plant the first colony in the northern parts of Virginia, and so on and so on. And Washington's farewell address makes the list, and let us with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. Whatever may be conceded to the influence of refined education on minds of peculiar structure, reason and experience both forbid us to expect that national morality can prevail in exclusion of religious principle. Let's hang that in every state house. Yes, it's all relevant to the study of history, but it's easy to see again what the narrative here is. This was, and was always meant to be a Christian nation. And for bills like these, again, we're just teaching our kids history. We're just hanging up historical documents, so they expect these to pass fairly easily too. Let's go back to our friend, Democratic Representative and self-described demon buster Kimberly Daniels. This photo from a video where she's speaking in tongues to a packed house. This is the second year, the 2020 session, that she has filed the Bible Literacy Act here in Florida. This is exactly what it sounds like. They suggest that states require schools to offer elective classes on the Bible, Old and New Testaments, to grades 9 and above with the purpose of teaching students a knowledge of, quote, biblical content, characters, poetry, and narratives that are prerequisites to understanding contemporary society and culture. Now, this wouldn't prohibit schools from teaching other electives, offering other electives, studying other holy texts or religions, but the Christian one would be law. So I don't know how you could see this as not preferencing or endorsing one religion over all others and none. Currently, Bible classes are taught in 7 states, all in the South, of course. Last year, Representative Anna Eskamani, who is a friend of the cause, challenged this bill. She asked Representative Daniels, my family is Iranian American. My family identifies with Islam. Would you consider adding the Quran to your bill to be a friendly amendment as another holy book that could be taught objectively to your language? Daniels replied simply, no. Here's the text of the bill. See how closely this resembles the description that they provided. The school district shall install a secular program of education not limited to an objective study of religion, an objective study of the Bible, including but not limited to a course on the Hebrew scriptures in the Old Testament of the Bible, and a course on the New Testament of the Bible has to be offered as an elective to students grades 9 through 12. Copy and paste from the model bill. Now, what does objective study mean? Secular program? Whose translation and interpretation do we get to use? How can you be objective towards religion and the Bible when even the basic tenets of Scripture are disputed between, by some estimates, over 30,000 denominations? And in places where these classes already exist, like Texas, there are studies showing that they aren't actually being taught very objectively. Kentucky passed a Bible class bill in 2017, and a review by the ACLU found that many of those offered courses violated the Constitution. Here's the surprised face. Now, disagree with me here if you like. I host a podcast where I'm very opinionated. People disagree with me all the time. But make it an elective comparative religions class, a world religions class where we teach all of them, right? Put the Romans and the Greeks and the Egyptians up against the study of the Bible and learn about Islam and Hinduism. Study the things in the Bible that are clearly stolen from other ancient myths and beliefs. Virgin births, December 25th, the winter solstice, great flood myths, sun gods. These are not unique to Christianity. And like actually reading the Bible often leads us out of the belief and using that proper skepticism in the right environment. Perhaps if we taught that in schools with a critical, skeptical viewpoint, then we would be doing some good. I would let my kids sign up for that class, but just the Bible, not so much a fan. Now, when I engage with people on this, a lot of times I hear, well, it's an elective, Sarah. They don't have to take it. Let me ask you, put your skeptic hat on. Is that a well-reasoned response? What could possibly go wrong with an elective Bible class? While the model legislation is targeted to high schools, there are other public schools around the country who offer Bible classes at much younger grades. In December 2018, Elizabeth Deal in West Virginia took a lawsuit to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, having had her case dismissed at a lower court. In first grade, her daughter and another girl who were enrolled in the school but didn't take the Bible class, opted out of their Bible class, were put in a coat closet by the teacher and given an iPad to amuse themselves with while that Bible class took place. In third grade, the bullying started. The kids started telling her that she and her family were going to hell. One girl saw a Harry Potter book that she was reading, slammed it down on her desk and yelled, "You don't need to be reading this witch magic stuff. You should be reading the Bible." Full of witch magic stuff. The problem with such a course being an elective, obviously in heavily Christian areas, is that it singles out these one or two kids who don't take the class. We have schools dealing with bullying and harassment right now that are dealing with them poorly because we don't have the funding and the means to take it on. And so, yes, even as an elective, you're still advocating taxpayer funds to religious purpose, regardless of how objective or secular it might claim to be. And in this particular West Virginia class, the class was taught by a teacher and a pastor. 14 Bible literacy bills were filed in various states. In 2018, only Tennessee's actually passed. So ours died in committee last year, and now it's been filed again for 2020. Christian teachers being censored for their religious views isn't really a big problem. But the Blitz paints the picture that Christian teachers are just super persecuted. So the Teacher Protection Act provides a remedy for a school district or board member or other employee that might be sued regarding constitutionally protected religious expression. Under that act, those individuals might request assistance from the Attorney General to defend them in court. Assistance here also means indemnification by the state for damages and costs, including legal fees and court costs. And they argue that teachers and administrators are just so confused because there's so much case law that's confusing and sends this mixed message. They don't know whether if they allow a student to not, if they oppress the freedom of expression of a religious student or allow it. Either way, they're going to end up in court. And Andrew Seidel over at the Freedom from Religion Foundation will be banging out angry letters on a typewriter. The Student Prayer Certification Act. Now, this sounds like it might be about prayer in school, but it's more about paperwork about prayer in school. I didn't know this until I started researching Project Blitz, but the U.S. Congress enacted useless legislation that requires public elementary and secondary schools to certify annually in writing that they do not have a policy preventing or denying participation in constitutionally protected prayer. So federal law requires schools to submit this in writing that they don't have a policy. The Federal Department of Education can withhold funding from public schools if they don't comply with this reporting policy. So the Student Prayer Certification Act basically copies down that national legislation into state law. And really, I mean, it has little impact on anything other than, like, seriously, we have to send a letter. We have to fill out another form every year. And finally, preserving religious freedom in schools. This is reinforcing a lot of what's already protected. School districts can't discriminate on the basis of religious viewpoint or expression. Students may express religious belief in coursework and artwork. They can organize prayer groups and clubs. This is all of the stuff that I knew in the 90s as a kid organizing Bible club at school. This act doesn't change anything, but it does specifically provide that teachers or coaches, for example, can participate in student-initiated prayer, despite court rulings that find even if they were to bow their head during a student-led prayer, that can be seen as a government endorsement of that prayer and the message and of the religion. So that's all the stuff that kind of affects education. Next, I want to look at the efforts to change the narrative about religious freedom. The National Motto License Plate Act would require states to offer a special In God We Trust license plate design. Legislation to permit car owners to choose a In God We Trust design is on the books in many states, and the hope here, in their words, is to create a moving billboard of a Christian nation. Last year, the Secular Coalition of Arizona discovered that $17 from every one of their In God We Trust plate registrations was going to Christian nationalists, an anti-LGBT hate group, Alliance Defending Freedom, who you'll recall a few slides back was bringing in $50 gazillion a year. The next few are proclamations, not laws, so these are more about states just sort of sending a message to the public, right? Government recognition of Christianity. A proclamation recognizing Religious Freedom Day. Again, this is sort of a state-level version of the National Religious Freedom Day, and this is, again, about bending the narrative about religious freedom using cherry-picked quotes from the founders and others. And do you think it mentions the religious freedom of those of no faith? One little blip at the end of page 2, almost as an afterthought. There's a proclamation recognizing Christian Heritage Week because one day is just not enough. Let's celebrate all week long. This one includes quotes from historical figures like Franklin, Jefferson, and Madison, and starts, quote, religious faith was not only important in official American life during the periods of discovery, exploration, colonization, and growth, but religious faith also has been acknowledged and incorporated into all three branches of American federal government from their very beginning. This nation was founded on principles of religious freedom, and our founding fathers sought God, his blessings and guidance as they established these United States as a free and independent nation. Citation needed. Why, even the first act of America's first Congress in 1774 was to have a minister open with prayer and lead Congress in reading of 4 chapters of the Bible. You thought watching the legislative sessions on the Florida Channel was boring. Then we have a proclamation recognizing the importance of the Bible in history, seeing a pattern, where the first 2 sort of spin the story that our founders' belief in God was important and informed all of their decisions in constructing our government. This one tries to convince you that the Bible itself was foundational to our government too. They suggest Gutenberg chose the Bible to be the first book off his new printing press invention. The Bible has been translated into 3,223 languages. Surveys report that 9 out of 10 Americans have a Bible in their home. I have at least 2. And we use them to point out inconsistencies and, goofy stories. And my wife was happily provided those by the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society as an ex-Jehovah's Witness. Now, we enjoy some of the things we do on our podcast sometime. We'll take these two different versions of the Bible provided by the Watchtower, and we'll open them up and discover that some edits had been made because the old men in New York got new light from God and deleted entire sections. We keep Bibles not because we believe, but we keep them to demonstrate the errors and inconsistencies and nonsense. So out of that 9 out of 10, I'd be interested to see how many believers even read them. But never mind the facts. They also cite the earliest public education law, 1642, which declared it being the chief project of that old deluder Satan to keep men from the knowledge of the Scriptures, as in former times, it is therefore ordered that after the Lord hath increased the settlement to the number of 50 householders, they shall then forthwith appoint one within their town to teach all children to read and write. So there you go. Schools were expressly created so that people could read the Bible. See? We did take God out of schools. And finally, a proclamation recognizing Christmas Day. Are you shitting me? It's already a national holiday. Now, the final grouping of Blitz initiatives I'm calling weaponizing Christianity. During a town hall with Florida legislators in Lake County in August of 2019, Representative Anthony Sabatini, here on the left, proclaimed that the need to protect students from discrimination in charter schools is all made up. One distinction, that question was actually about private schools, not charter schools. Charter schools are technically public schools, but I digress. Well, it probably won't surprise you to know that the private schools in question, the ones who have discriminatory policies for admission and hiring and students and all of this stuff, they're religious schools. And those schools are the beneficiaries of vouchers and scholarship money to the tune of nearly $1 billion over the next 5 years of your tax money. So you may have seen in the news lately, there are some major corporations who have decided to pull out of that scam and stop funding those scholarships. And who knows how effective that might actually be in the end. So under public policy resolutions, there are some blatant attacks on the LGBTQ community. And these, again, just express a legislative agenda. So we have intimate sexual relations only between married heterosexual couples. Why this is the business of the state, I have no idea. Reliance on and maintenance of birth gender. That one's for me. They argue here available scientific evidence does not support the assertion that gender identity is an innate fixed property of human beings independent of biological sex. And most children, they say, who experience cross-gender identification do not continue to do so into adolescence or adulthood. But that's false. So first, science is showing us more and more that gender is a spectrum, that the binary is more of a social construct. Second, we haven't really studied transgender youth into adulthood in big enough scales to make a claim like that. And anecdotally, the examples that we do have say the opposite. They also say members of the transgender population are at significantly higher risk of a variety of mental health problems compared to members of the non-transgender population. Well, sure. Maybe if we wouldn't have higher rates of mental health issues if you weren't telling us we're sinners and we're going to hell and we can't use restrooms in public and we have to pass through all these expensive gatekeeping checkpoints in order to change our driver's license. They point out high rates of suicide attempts in my community, and they're not wrong. But again, how much of that is brought on by the mistreatment we receive, particularly from faith communities? So in the same way that they spent decades doing with homosexuality, they're trying to spin this as a disease of the mind and that we're infected with demons and needs to be treated as a psychological problem. And a resolution establishing public policy favoring adoption by intact heterosexual marriage-based families. That means that a foster or adoption agency gets to play the religious freedom card and turn down gay couples in adopting. 10 states currently have laws on the books allowing religious-based discrimination by child welfare agencies. But wait, there's more. Now take all of those resolutions and change them into policy. So you have the Marriage Tolerance Act, which is basically the First Amendment Defense Act, which has been rebranded. An act to prohibit discriminatory action against a person who believes, speaks, or acts in accordance with a sincerely held religious belief that marriage is or should be recognized as the union of one man and one woman, or that sexual relations are properly reserved to such marriage. The Child Protection Act, here they want to ensure that adoption and foster agencies get to have that discrimination exemption card under the Free Exercise Clause. Here they say this act is not intended to limit or deny any person's right to adopt or participate in foster care, but that's exactly what it does by allowing child-placing agencies with sincerely held religious beliefs, because corporations are people, to refuse to adopt out to gay couples or non-Christian couples or interracial couples. Literally anything you could throw against the wall as a deeply held religious belief, that gets the exemption card. At the end of January last year, South Carolina's governor asked the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services to issue a waiver, and they did, allowing a state-supported, faith-based foster care agency to discriminate against prospective gay foster parents and even non-Christians after a Jewish woman was rejected by the group. And what infuriates me most about this is that the perception seems to be you would rather have a child be homeless or stuck in the system, maybe even age out of the system, than be placed with capable, loving gay or non-Christian parents. And I find that utterly disgusting. The Clergy Protection Act relates to protection of clergy and religious organizations for honoring a sincerely held belief that participation in lawful marriage. Here's another solution in search of a problem. How many news stories do you see about pastors who have been taken to court because they refuse to marry gay people? This stuff just really doesn't happen. As for religious organizations, again, this is Burwell v. Hobby Lobby, where the courts poorly decided that businesses can have beliefs. They cite bakers and florists whose religious freedom was violated by non-discrimination ordinances and subsequently lost their businesses in the resulting legal battle and public response. The Licensed Professional Civil Rights Act, same idea here, except this is where the state requires an occupational license. So here they argue that professionals are being censored or deprived of their chosen livelihoods, not because of poor service to their clients, but because of disagreements with or disapproval of their sincerely held religious belief, such as it not being ethical to participate or facilitate abortion, or same-sex sexual intercourse, or transgender operations. Aspiring professionals are also being turned away from schools and not being granted degrees because of their sincerely held religious beliefs. This, they say, is hostile to religious belief, of course, never addressing the hostility of the religious belief itself. So that's a lot to take in. On October 24th, 2019, during a Project Blitz strategy call with legislators and staff from about 20 states, Leah Carawan, executive director of the Congressional Prayer Caucus Foundation, explained that the original Project Blitz playbook was necessary because they felt they were getting beat as it relates to religious freedom legislation. So now they're trying to rebrand Project Blitz to Freedom for All. No, not because Project Blitz evokes World War II imagery. It's because we're on to them. So let's listen to a clip from that call.
And the Project Blitz is now renamed Freedom for All for the same reason, very strategically. The other side finally caught on to what you all were doing and the massive legislation that was going forth across the nation, the incredible successes all across the nation, and they were scratching their heads saying, what in the world happened? They started talking about Project Blitz, and as soon as we understood that they knew they were onto us, we changed the name, shifted things around a little bit. Now they're talking about something that nobody else has really been talking about, and we've renamed and moved on, but it's moving just as strong and just as powerfully. The first year we rolled it out, we had about an 800% increase in the passage of successful religious freedom legislation, and each subsequent year, 800% increase, in this last year, 900% increase in 2019. It has been enormously successful, using exactly the strategic process, looking at an opportunity, taking advantage of that opportunity, accessing the networks that we've been building, and then seeing the solution, and then shifting. It's not something you put in place and leave. You look at it, you assess it, you revise it, and you continue to make it better every year.
Now that they know that we know that they know that we know that they know that we know, they've decided to rebrand this. But look, Project Blitz, Freedom for All, but actually only Christians, whatever you want to call it, we're on to you. Now, that's heavy. So in light of all of this, I tried to find some comfort. I'm comforted in the fact that polling continues to show that those views don't represent the majority of Americans, even religious ones. If only our government were representative of the actual diversity of Americans. And over the recent years, the number of people who identify as religious, who attend religious services, or who find religion important in their lives is dropping. Recent general social survey data showed that the religious nuns are now the largest religious demographic in the U.S., which is now slightly larger than Catholics and evangelicals. And research continues to show that younger generations are less religious than any generation before. And those lazy millennials who take everything for granted and don't want to work a hard day's work are actually busy organizing marches and challenging politicians. And they're running for public office. And they're winning. So we can debate the finer points of gun control, right? But the activism that came out of Parkland in the hours, days, and weeks after that tragic school shooting shows us that young people do care about politics. They're engaged. They're going to change the world. I'm reminded of that protest sign that went viral. You may have seen it. If you build a wall, my generation will tear it down. Our young people don't deserve the claims of apathy so often hurled at them. My generation does. I didn't get involved until my 30s. But I see in our youth a new wave of civic responsibility, of compassion for those who are different than them, and with that a strong sense of urgency. Now, let's not take this the wrong way, right? There's still plenty that us older folks can do here. Don't put us out to pasture just yet. But the challenge for organizers now is to match talent with expertise and needs. And that translates even to how we consider people running for office. It concerns me, for example, that we have lawmakers whose job it is to write laws, define regulations, and conduct investigations, say, in the technology sector, who don't even know how cell phones, the internet, or Google, or Facebook work. That's Ted Poe of Texas, former district attorney, county judge, and a U.S. representative, pictured here during a congressional hearing in 2018 when he asked the CEO of Google, "I have an iPhone. And if some of you are at the punchline already, and if I move from here and I go over here and sit with my Democrat friends, which would make them real nervous, does Google track my movement? Does Google, through this phone, know that I have moved here and moved over to the left while holding a not Google, Apple iPhone product?" And he did not seek re-election, which was probably a wise decision. How many of you have seen this tweet that's gone viral several times? Your parents in 1996 don't trust anyone on the internet. Your parents in 2016, freedomeagle.facebook says Hillary invented AIDS. Bless his heart, that's my father right there. And I love him to death, but some of the stuff he shares on Facebook. Look, I don't want freedomeagle.facebook guy writing our laws. Now, there's some truth to comedy, but again, there are people in demographics with knowledge and skills that are right for our cause, and we have to be good at matching skills to needs. But I do want to underscore the importance of our youth. They have many more years left in this state, in this country, on this planet than I do. And so the leaders of today, we have to be preparing to shift to a more advisory role while the younger folks come over and take the reins of leadership. Are we engaging youth now so that they'll be ready when the time comes? Do we have succession planning in our groups, in the movement? My generation grew up on the front edge of the new internet frontier. I connected to Prodigy on a 12-baud modem that had to call long distance just to get online, and long distance calls cost per minute back then. And I've tried to keep, and if somebody picked up the phone while you were on the internet, it disconnected you, it sucked real bad. But I've tried to keep up, but advancements in technology have just outpaced me. I used to run my own business doing computer work. I ran web servers and mail servers and DNS servers, all in my house. But I'm not the expert I used to be. So it boggles my mind that there's this movement to go back to the good old days. When queer people couldn't come out of the closet and women were supposed to be at home making babies and sandwiches, and black folks were forced to drink from separate drinking fountains, and much, much worse. That was the good old days? For some, perhaps. And look, I have fond memories of my childhood too, but I'm not clamoring for a return to the 80s. Even with our current social challenges, generally speaking, more things are better for more people right now than they have ever been in our history. Why go back? I want to look forward. As a humanist, as a parent, I just want to leave my kids a world that is a little better off than it was when I came into it. And in this stage of life, I'm realizing it's becoming less about what I want in the world and more about helping them create the world they want to live in. So what the hell do we do? What role should you and I play? If you're like me, after sifting through all of this, I felt overwhelmed, a bit hopeless, definitely attacked. And once that passed, I realized we've got to shout this from the rooftops. We have to shine the hot white light of reason across the pages of this playbook. And we have to come together and get organized and make a plan. Sometimes it feels like we're powerless to these forces that are at work around us. We're going to talk in a minute about some of the legislation that's going on right now. And even as we look at that, I think, God, do we have time to react in a timely manner? There's not a magic bullet that's going to stop all of this stuff. But I would like to share some personal goals that I'd set for myself last year that I'm still working through that may be helpful to you as well as we all try to find our place in this moment. First, we have to agree to avoid things that don't support our goals. Sharing memes that mock religion feels good, and we all probably do it. I'm certainly guilty. But constantly screaming into the void on the internet, into the echo chamber, doesn't support my goals. All caps Facebook and Twitter wars with anonymous believers isn't going to advance the goals. There's a time and place and benefit to us being able to come together like this and, agree that God's not real and roll our eyes at religion. But you have to step out of that bubble sometimes and get out from behind the keyboard, focus on the goals. I'll step out of this for a moment just to tell you that a couple weeks ago, I was asked to be on a panel at the Polk Teen Pregnancy Prevention Alliance. And it was a faith leaders event. So this was an event that 10 years ago was started with the idea that they just asked a pastor to come in who'd bang on the pulpit and say abstinence a lot, and that was our faith presentation about reducing teen pregnancy. And so it's starting to broaden a little bit, and they brought in some different voices, and our voices caused a bit of a rift among some of the hardliners. But I have to be willing to get out in from my bubble in this comfortable space and go into the lion's den and have those hard conversations and be respectful. The believers are people too, right? And we were many of us, I won't say all, but many of us were once there. And we came out of it. So if we give people the benefit, maybe one day they can too. But if we go online and start shouting them down on the Ledger comments section, that's not going to help anything, right? We have to educate and empower our youth. Schoolhouse Rocks is not going to teach them how government works anymore. It's just not working. And if I've learned anything from raising my kids, it's that there are topics that we think are way over their heads that really aren't. We've went to the March for Our Lives rally in Lakeland. We went to the Science March in Orlando. We go to Pride every year. We took them to the Teacher March in Tallahassee. They go to vote with us in every election. Am I preparing them to be future leaders? Are they learning leadership skills and critical thinking skills? And I like to use a little street epistemology on my son. This is fun to do if you have a young person in your life. Play these games. But I want to know what he's thinking, but really I want to know why. How did you come to such confidence that this is something that you believe? Right? Why do you think building a wall along our border to keep people from coming here illegally? What do you think about that? I don't think that's a good idea, he said. Well, why not? I ask. How did you come to that conclusion? Of course, it turns out even my 9-year-old knows that ladders and shovels and boats and airplanes exist. Okay, it's slightly more complex than that, but I want him to learn how to question the things that he believes are true. So ask your kids, do you think there should be a Bible class offered in your school? And let them talk through their reasons for their answer. Try to stay neutral. Ask questions to help them figure out if they've reasoned through their position, if they've thought of all the questions. And it's really fun. But don't just do that with our kids. We have to have conversations with people whose beliefs are different, like going to this faith leaders event that I was invited to. And we do it in a genuine, polite, in-person conversation and go into it with an agreement not to argue, not to put a check mark in the win column, but just to better understand each other. Gently and respectfully challenge beliefs like the Bible should be taught in schools. Should we also teach the Bhagavad Gita, the Hindu Puranas? How would you feel if the Florida legislature were considering a bill requiring all schools an elective of the Quran? Why? How did you come to that conclusion? Be a mirror to reflect back to them their beliefs. And you'll absolutely run into some apathetic people who just don't care. See if you can help them explore why they don't care, and maybe they'll see why they should. And allow your own positions to be challenged. Have I sufficiently reasoned my own position? Am I just agreeing with my tribe? Am I willing to consider new evidence and update my beliefs accordingly? I want to believe as many true things and as few false things as possible. So from time to time, you have to let that error check software scan your hard drive. Ask questions. Question everything. You may have a fantastic idea and fall into that trap of, they're probably already on that, or somebody else thought of that already. This almost happened to me last year when we sort of started getting involved in this. I thought, how do we as a community, what do I do to respond to this Project Blitz thing? And so I'll take you down the rabbit trail quickly. I thought there's a lot we can do as individuals and some things that we can do as a community, but we need advocates in the legislature who will speak openly when these bills get filed, when they're in committees, when they get onto the floor. And I realized I don't even know who in the Florida legislature that would be. Certainly, friends of the cause, Carlos Guillermo Smith and Ana Escamani. Carlos was outspoken against the In God We Trust on Our Schools bill, tweeting, "Let's keep a clear separation between church and state." Ana Escamani challenged Kim Daniels on the Bible class bill, but who else? The Congressional Free Thought Caucus was formed 2 years ago in the U.S. House, and it has 10 members. What if we had a state-level Free Thought Caucus? 4 or 5 other states have secular caucuses. How do you even start that? What does that look like? Who would be in it? Would it be helpful? Is there enough interest? Yes, this is how my brain works, and this is why I have trouble sleeping. But I reached out into the void, and I asked David Williamson from the Central Florida Free Thought community, what do you think about this? Is this something that we could do? Is this something we should do? And David said, oh yeah, we have good contacts for this. Let's find out. And so then we started those gears turning, and there's conversations happening about creating a secular caucus here in Florida. But none of that happens unless you ask lots of questions. So there are good ideas in this room. Let's hear them. Vote. Vote. Vote in the primaries, the general, the midterms, and school board and city council and national and state and everything. Volunteer for a candidate that you support. Go to your school board meetings. Go to city council meetings. Call your representatives in government. Schedule a meeting with a lawmaker at their local office. Show up at town halls and ask questions of our elected officials about their position on real religious liberty, the separation of religion and government. These are state-level initiatives, and there are national organizations working to help us, but the key here, I think, is going to be more local and grassroots activism. So get involved. Hey, run for office yourself. After 6 or so years of doing my podcast, I've got way too much damning audio out in the universe, and I swear a lot. But I've thought about running for a local office. I mean, a trans atheist in Polk County? I don't know about that. And you may be thinking there's no way I could do that, like I'm thinking there's no way I could do that. But I will remind you, and I promise this is the last time I'm going to pick on her today, we elected a demon buster exorcist to the Florida House and a giant toddler to the highest office in the land. The political views and opinions expressed during this presentation are solely those of the presenter and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of the atheist community of Polk County, its members, or affiliates. Look, I'm just saying, consider running for office. You've got a good shot at this. And consider, Daniels has done a ton of damage since being elected in 2016. In the 2018 election, she won her primary race by over 2,500 votes and then ran unopposed as the incumbent, despite investigations by an ethics commission into falsified tax filings around her church properties. Well, of course she's going to run opposed. Why would we run a Republican against her? She's doing the work of the Republicans. She sits on the House, she at the time sat on the House Education Committee, still does, I believe, and before she got busted for filing false financial disclosures, she sat on the Public Integrity and Ethics Committee. Who is the science, evidence, reason-based candidate going to be in that district? What about our districts? I can't tell you how to vote, who to vote for, or what party to support, but the legislators that currently represent Polk County are generally supportive of religious initiatives like those you've heard today. Project Blitz targets more than just we the secular people. We have to join forces with other communities that these initiatives marginalize. We have to strengthen and form connections between secular groups and GSRM groups. I'm educating folks now. Does everybody know what GSRM means? Good, I love seeing no shaking heads. GSRM stands for Gender, Sexual, and Romantic Minorities. It's kind of the new wave of LGBT. So where LGBT is LGBTQ, is LGBTQIA, is LGBTQIAA+. Every time we embrace a new way of identifying, we just add a letter to the end of the alphabet soup. GSRM kind of takes that all in and sorts it differently. So you have, under gender, you have folks like me who are trans or non-binary. You have the sexual minorities, gay, lesbian, bi, pan, poly, that sort of group. Romantic minorities is one that never gets talked about. That's people like people who are, say, asexual but are also romantically interested. So someone who may not be interested in sex at all, but may still want to have romantic relationships. There are people who are aromantic, who have no interest in romantic relationships either. So this sort of divides up the minorities into better categories, I think, than LGBTQIA++. So I'm starting to see some groups sort of embrace that. So we have to build coalitions with those groups and women's rights groups and faith leaders who get that all of this overreach is unnecessary. They want to protect separation of religion and government. They're out there because they understand that it protects them too. I've talked to some of them. Let's call them up and offer them a seat at the table of ideas. And this can't be the work solely of an organization or its board. Like, these are personal connections that many of you might have as individuals that you could reach out to and bring into the coalition. And then, of course, support the organizations that are established, that are primed and willing to offer resources back to us. There are organizations at every level we can put our time, energy, and money into. Become a member. When representatives from organizations can sit across from our elected officials and advocate for evidence-based solutions in legislation and say, our organization represents X number of your constituents, or Y number of Floridians, or this percentage of Americans. And as long as we turn out the polls and back that up, there's some currency and leverage in that. The organizations supporting Project Blitz have a considerable head start and a ton of money. So we have some catching up to do. In February of 2018, 43 national organizations came together in a statement opposing Project Blitz and similar legislation. Some names you'll find familiar: American Atheists, of which we are an affiliate; Secular Coalition for America; Americans United for Separation of Church and State, the ACLU. But there's also groups in this coalition like African American Ministers in Action, the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty, the Episcopal Church, Muslim, Presbyterian, and Methodist groups, and LGBTQ rights organizations. Finally, all these years after Project Blitz first launched, there is a united opposition to these efforts. So without getting complacent, I think we can kind of take some comfort in that. The Baptist Joint Committee, as a side note, if you are into podcasts, if you like listening to things, download the Baptist Joint Committee's podcast. They did a 10-episode series about Project Blitz, and they talk about it from the angle of being a faith group and why they support the separation of religion and government from a position of being a religious group. It's really interesting. And I'm also comforted to know that many of you are already doing great work around this, that we're really starting to get organized here and trying to figure out how we, in our capacity, can make a dent in this Project Blitz issue. Where do I fit in? How can you best contribute? How are we part of that solution? And there will be disagreements in how to approach this stuff, what items should have our highest focus. But if we remember that we are more alike than we are different, and when we bring our unique talents and skills and knowledge together in a common cause, we find power. So I hope this leaves you with a better understanding of the nature and the massive scale of this effort, and I hope you're already thinking of how your own expertise and skills and passions can be focused towards that goal of leaving this world just a little bit better than we found it by fighting for a secular government that represents and respects all people. Thank you. In March, this is a meeting you are not going to want to miss. Has anyone not know Dave Warnock? Has everybody heard of him pretty much? Dave Warnock is amazing. He's a former minister, member of the Clergy Project, and he was diagnosed with ALS recently. And so he was just given a few years to live, and he decided that, in light of that, I'm going to live my best life. And so he's gone on this sort of world tour to talk about what it's like to know you're dying and be a secular person and not looking forward to heaven and the afterlife and what that's like for him. And he's at the point now where he's really starting to lose some motor function. They have some sort of, the requirements that he needs a stool and he can only hold certain things and the microphone needs to be on a stand. And so he's already, just in that short time, really starting to, it's quick moving. He's really starting to feel this. But I swear you'll cry, you'll walk away from that, I think, feeling a whole different thing about life. Just every time I hear him talk, I've heard his story, I know it, I've heard it over and over again, but every time I see him, it renews that in me a little bit. So that'll be March 28th, so we'll hope you'll come back here for that. Thank you all for coming out. We have some time. You can mill around and chat if you'd like. I'm happy to take any questions, or we can talk amongst ourselves, and I'm happy to answer questions then.